I'm Lindsey, Derrington. I'm Executive Director of Preservation Austin. We are the only citywide nonprofit dedicated to celebrating and protecting Austin's historic places. Our organization, let's see, years back, I started with Preservation Austin in 2015, and I think it was 2017, 2018 when Pat Calhoun, who's one of the longtime residents of this neighborhood, reached out to our organization for support establishing a local historic district. Local historic districts are really basic tools that have been used in cities and smaller communities since the 70s, really to protect historic places by taking groups of buildings that are significant and actually zoning them historic to protect them from demolition. Really fundamentally, it's a planning tool. You get to say, hey, here's a group of significant homes, and how do we want development to look within this area? What's really special about this neighborhood, it's longtime residents or the children of people who built the homes. It was much more, I think, for them, more than just saving beautiful houses. It was really saving their history. And so they reached out to us to provide whatever support we could, if we could. This neighborhood also didn't hire a consultant to do that. It's a long process. And Pat and Brenda and Mr. Scales and Miss Ayala and Jen, they did all of this work you'd normally hire a consultant for. They did all that themselves. And then Preservation Austin provided 2 small grants and meeting space, and I think a little bit of research support, but did what we could to help them reach this really high threshold of building consensus in their community for this district. And Austin, unlike most cities in the United States, is really behind on historic districts. This gets a little bit wonky, but most cities have been doing that since the 70s. Austin didn't start doing it until 2004. So San Antonio has 35 historic districts. Austin has 8. So we're really behind the game. So it's not only remarkable what this neighborhood and this community achieved, just creating that district and protecting their history and celebrating it so well. They were only the 8th district this city's ever seen. So I just can't say enough about them and that achievement in and of itself. I started Preservation Austin almost 10 years ago. I started as a programs coordinator. I've been working in historic preservation since 2007 when I first graduated from undergrad. I became interested in this field because I'm from St. Louis, which is a very different city than Austin, but when I grew up in the suburbs, got my driver's license, was driving around, the city that so many people had turned their backs on. It's like the textbook example of white flight and urban renewal and segregation. And it's got this beautiful history and culture and all these buildings that need so much investment and care. And so I became inspired to do this work in high school before I even knew what the work was. I knew I wanted to do something with historic places. I didn't have money to develop them myself, and then went to college in St. Louis and found out that historic preservation was a thing. And then started working at St. Louis's citywide nonprofit, 2007. Kind of long road here. Ended up moving to Austin for opportunity, like so many other people, and was really fortunate to get a job with Preservation Austin because the nonprofit side of things really allows you to be creative and support people and kind of build the world you want to see from a preservation standpoint. You're not rubber stamping demolitions or, reviewing really complicated federal processes, all of which are important. You really do get to be creative, and you get to work directly with people who want to do this work with you, which is very exciting and very gratifying. We were working with Rogers Washington Holy Cross at a time of transition for Preservation Austin because Pat and Brenda had been working with the previous executive director, and I really didn't have much connection with them because my role was different. But when I became executive director in 2019, I inherited this wonderful group of people, and really at the beginning it was, we need meeting space. Brenda would call and say, hey, we need a meeting. They were hashing out their design standards. So local historic districts, all the neighbors have to agree on a set of standards that says, how do we maintain our historic homes and what do we want new development to look like? 2 really important pieces. And so that requires patiently working with everybody to make sure that everyone feels comfortable with what those restrictions are, because we're the United States, we're also Texas. The idea of telling someone else what to do with their property and what they can and can't do, that can get contentious. And Brenda led those meetings and was really, really patient and really, worked hard to successfully build that consensus around what the neighborhood should be, because if you don't have a certain number of people on board, the whole thing falls apart. So them leading that process was huge. And so I just provided the room and stayed late by an hour and a half, and then like watched and answered questions when I could. It was really as simple as that. When I say we were there to support, it really was a support because the residents and the neighbors were leading everything. We supported the local historic district effort, but when Preservation Austin really got to work closely with Brenda and Pat and Mr. Scales, and Mr. Poole and Jen and Misael was through our homes tour. So Preservation Austin, one of the programs we have, it's really our largest program, is an annual homes tour each spring, which people like to look at pretty houses, sure, but also it means that people are exploring like a really personal look at what historic architecture is. And it's homes that current families are living in, so you get to see that, like, okay, preservation isn't just about a museum kind of piece or freezing a building in time. Like, historic buildings are really flexible. They're still providing meaningful, beautiful homes for today's families. And we selected Rogers Washington Holy Cross to be our homes tour, like neighborhood we focused on in 2021. And that was in the middle of the pandemic. So we had one virtual homes tour already, and then for this neighborhood, it really worked out well because we got to incorporate interviews. You know, it wasn't just like footage of the insides of houses, it was residents talking about their experiences growing up here, their experiences building their homes, their families and their family histories. And so that meant we really did get to work much more closely with them. And it's a really beautiful little artifact that's 40 minutes long and sets this neighborhood within the context of the 1928 city plan, of redlining, of how remarkable it is this neighborhood is here, given that those homeowners, it wasn't easy for them to get loans to build their houses. It wasn't easy to do anything, whereas the federal government made it really easy for white families to do a lot of things after World War II, not so much for black families. So setting this neighborhood in that context, but then just running with like all the incredible stories and even like day-to-day experiences that are incorporated into that history that make Rogers Washington Holy Cross so special. I'm not sure with any of the other homes tours we've done that we've had so many like original families. That's rare. I think like having so many children of original like people who built the houses, or Mr. Poole, he built that house and he's still here. I think that's unique no matter what the city is, Austin or anywhere else in the country. Interviewing longtime residents is such a different experience than like reading someone's obituary or, you know, reading in a book the history of this or that. To hear like from Ms. Calhoun about how closing down Keeling Middle School impacted her father, like he retired, it was his life's work, and how desegregation felt for East Austin. She says something to the effect of like, all these kids are having to go west, but nobody's going east, the loss of support with that. It's just, it adds so much like weight to history that if you're willing to learn it, you can read about it, but when you hear about what it felt like, then that's totally different. Something that we have in that film, Ms. Malik did, she produced a show called Jam City that was on like public access television, and you can still find those recordings at the Austin History Center. And it's like kids dancing on the weekends, and like this, that would be something that teenagers in the 80s would have watched. It's just such like a, I don't know, it's just so special. It's just like, what was life? What were people into? What did people help to create? That's really special. Being able to showcase, like work with the neighborhood, because Pat was involved in like planning the tour, as was Brenda. I mean, they were really hands-on. It wasn't just Preservation Austin producing this thing with our volunteers, like Brenda and Pat were among our volunteers. They've just been wonderful partners ever since. I'm trying to, you know, we had Wesley United Methodist Church on a tour subsequently, and Pat coordinated that and was on that committee. I don't have a really great answer for that. It was never a one and done. It's like we made really good, we really connected with these folks because what they're doing is like the best of what we can even try to do. Like they're like, oh, this is our history. This is what we want to, you know, we're going to save it. We're going to take a crash course in historic zoning and we're going to make it happen. And so we've worked with them in various capacities ever since, and we'll continue to. So as far as like neighborhoods where we know we have people we can call for support or for help, I mean, Pat Calhoun and Marilyn Poole's houses are on our in-person tour this year, which is awesome because we had the virtual experience 3 years ago, but now people will actually be able to tour those homes and really like get a sense of what they're like, which is great. We're also having a block party in this neighborhood, which will be wonderful. I think we're going to close off Givens, and so it'll be celebrating the neighborhood with walking tours and having vendors from the community, having a DJ, like a free preservation event that will be very exciting. The neighborhood pursued their historic district because they saw all the changes happening around them. Like if you drive a few blocks in either direction from this really small community, Rogers, Washington, Holy Cross is not a big one. So much history, but like relatively few homes compared to some historic districts, which might be like hundreds of homes. It's changed. Like Blackland neighborhoods changed, Chestnut has changed. Like these are really desirable homes for people with a lot of money, and sometimes you drive down blocks and it's like half of the houses or more were built only a few years ago, and they are much bigger and much more expensive than the housing there before, and of course you've lost all that history with those demolitions. So I think the critical thing for neighbors in this community was to like figure out, okay, local historic district, this like achieves two things for us. We get to celebrate our history and we get to protect it, because we're not going to see in Rogers, Washington, Holy Cross that kind of development, because literally we're able to say, here's the map, here are the houses that are contributing, they're the significant ones, these have history, these need to stay, so they're off limits. So that doesn't mean that everything is completely frozen in time, but it does mean that the community has said, we care about these places and we do not want to see these places go. And so I think within the next even 10 years, like that difference will be even more stark when you drive in or walk into Rogers, Washington, Holy Cross versus going to the neighborhoods surrounding it that are just really being decimated in so many ways because of the economic factors and like market forces in this city and the lack of protections we have for historic places in this city. Because even though Preservation Austin's doing this work every day, and we've got people like the folks here in Rogers, Washington, Holy Cross doing, you know, their part to save their little corner of the city. It's just Austin is growing so fast, and I think historically hasn't been very proactive in preservation, and now all of a sudden everyone is like, it's all they talk about is how the city is changing. A lot of people talk about it as if it's a lost cause, which it isn't. Like if we can all rally around places that we all agree are important, then we can make a difference in that and save what's here. But yeah, you just have to do it, which is why I love that this community did it. So Preservation Austin is working to change attitudes around preservation, that it's not a lost cause, that we shouldn't just assume that Austin's going to change forever and for the worse, or that growth even means bad. Like growth isn't bad inherently. It's just like, what are we losing as we grow, and how can we prioritize historic places in a way that they're not just an afterthought or even like a dirty word. You know, sometimes preservation is seen as being anti everything, when really we consider that it's pro, like, you are saving heritage, especially in East Austin. Like you're ensuring that whole communities' histories aren't erased. Like that's an equity issue that's extremely important. And what we're doing, you know, we have our homes tour, we have our awards where we celebrate people doing this work every day. We started Legacy Business Month last year, which is celebrating iconic businesses that have been open for 20 years or more. We do a lot of advocacy work. We have a grants program. We have given a few grants in this community to Ms. Calhoun, to Ms. Dotson, like supporting homeowners, you know, replacing their electrical panel. It's expensive. It's a couple $1,000s. And so if we as a nonprofit can lend our resources to help that kind of work happen, even if it's not something flashy you see, that's really meaningful. All that said, we're small. We've been around since 1953, but we're only recently at 4 staff people. So like we're rehabbing our own building and just like also in the thick of it and pulled all different directions every day. So I will say it's stories like Rogers, Washington, Holy Cross that do remind you this work is worth it when you get to work with lovely people who just are inspiring, like, and really kind and so willing to share their history with the rest of the community, that they see the value in that. And like, if the city at large understands why this matters and can look at them and see them leading by example, then that's also really important. It's not just Preservation Austin like wagging our fingers and saying you should do this. It's okay, look at these look at this group of people, they did it. It's not impossible. It's not going to be possible for everybody, but you can certainly do it, and that's gratifying. So Preservation Austin, it's important to us that we are building a more inclusive preservation movement for this century. It seems weird to keep emphasizing we're in the 21st century because we're like 24 years into it, but like preservation as a movement needs to grow. Everyone needs to see themselves reflected in this work, which they haven't always. You know, the work that we do is like anything else in the U.S. It's been very focused on white wealth and many men who have made money, and really looking at like just only a very narrow section of our history and using historic places to kind of to interpret that history. And so for us, you know, we're citywide. We take very seriously that commitment to representing the whole city, and then also expanding what people think of preservation. Some work we do, like supporting this community, is very like, it's a local historic district. How can we help them? Provide a grant, provide meeting space, you know, write letters to council. That's kind of what you'd think of as being preservation in certain ways. But apart from historic buildings having inherent value and worth for the history they hold and the stories they tell, historic places can also help with sustainability goals, with affordability goals, and then equity goals. It's work that really, it's not the answer to all those things, but as Austin is wanting to become a more affordable, sustainable, and equitable city, preservation can play, it's one of the solutions to those things in its own way. So expanding how people think about the work we do is important, and I think the current city council gets that, actually, because there's this like, you're either for growth or not growth dynamic. Historic preservation kind of it doesn't really fit into those categories neatly, but ends up like you're anti-growth, you're preservationist. That's really not the case. You can think Austin's growth is good and exciting, but still want to see historic places be part of that growth. So things that we've worked on recently, you know, making it easier to move houses across Austin. So if someone's going to tear a house down, like people actually put houses on Craigslist. They'll be like, hey, if you want this house, if you can pay to move it, then you can take it somewhere else. Just the city makes that really hard in ways that are too boring to go into, but worked with council to pass a resolution to make that easier. So instead of literally throwing a house away, can you move it to another part of town to create housing for someone else? The city loses like 600 houses every year. So can we, you know, move the needle on that even a little bit and save some of those places? And so that's, again, wonky end of it. Something else I'm proud of that we worked on was looking at the Historic Landmark Commission. They are appointed by City Council. They play a really important role in our preservation ecosystem and were really homogenous for a very long time. A lot of like white real estate professionals, architects, engineers, and their skill sets were appropriate. But, you know, just looking at the Landmark Commission, like, well, how could we as a preservation nonprofit help to change that? So we make a lot of recommendations to City Council. A council office will call and say, you know, we're looking for, you know, so-and-so for whatever district. Do you have any recommendations? And we have played a role in like perpetuating a very like white bubble. So 2 years ago, we provided Preservation Commission training for BIPOC advocates and had, I think, 16 people attend. And then this nationally accredited Preservation Commission training, it was virtual, and then we recommended those folks, like anyone after the training who was like, yes, I want to do this. I want to go spend like 6 hours at City Hall once a month reviewing demolitions and hopefully doing something like more proactive than that. So we had a handful of folks who said they were game, and then we recommended those folks to council and ended up like dramatically changing the composition of this 11-person commission just by like simply like, okay, what are the barriers to people serving? Like us, for one. Two, just like technical training. So if someone thought like, I really care about my history, you know, I'm an individual from East Austin, I care about this, and I've done all this research, but I don't really feel comfortable with the technical side of it. That's what that training was meant to help, like give people the base footing they need. So that was huge, and it was so simple. Like some of this stuff is just so simple. It just means like evaluating what you do and how you've been doing it and what your goals are and who really should be at the table. So this is just an example of the work that we've been doing, trying to very intentionally break down those barriers, people participating in work that is rightfully theirs. Working with the advocates in Rogers, Washington, Holy Cross has been very meaningful and very inspiring, and I mean that. Preservation work is really hard. A lot of times you're dealing with demolitions or screaming into the wind because you don't have enough funding, or, you know, this like policy issue seems insurmountable, and if you could just make someone like understand and get it, you could start to move the needle on what seems like just a massive hill that you're trying to climb. Being able, especially, I mean, we're coming out of COVID still. Like, for me personally, I became executive director in 2019, and within a year, we were in a pandemic for a few years, and it was during that time we did a lot of work with the community here. But when you're kind of have your nose to the grindstone, it's easy to disconnect from like the things that inspire you, especially when have just been doing it for like 15 years. So it's really good to be able to work with people and be able to partner with people and just to like bask in their glow and try to like internalize some of that energy to remind myself like why this work matters. Because people need us to be there to provide whatever we can give them. You know, we're not the be-all end-all by any stretch of the imagination, but they do need a citywide nonprofit that has resources, that has connections, that can help them achieve their goals. Not that we're ever giving up or that I would ever give up. I think this is what I've signed up to do forever. I don't know that I'll ever retire. This is what I'm meant to do. But it's good to get that injection of hope by working with folks who really care. I hope that Preservation Austin never goes away. We've been in existence since 1953, but I hope that this current era of the organization is remembered as being the one that really, truly like opened up and wanted to support people and partner with folks and wasn't kind of in its own lane, doing its own thing. I mean, there are growing pains for sure, but when you say like we really want to represent the whole city, that's like decades worth of work and trust building and like partnership. I hope that the work that we're doing right now is seen as the beginning of that new era for preservation in Austin and for Preservation Austin as an organization.